Let's dive into a really fascinating cultural mystery today. What if I told you that the ancient monster stories we all know, the ones we grew up with, aren't actually ancient at all? What if the folklore we just assume has been around forever was actually made up, and much, much more recently than you think? Okay, let me start with a simple question. Just think about it for a second. If you came face to face with a werewolf, what's the one thing, the number one rule for taking it down? I'm willing to bet you already know the answer. A silver bullet, right? It's just common knowledge. It's a classic monster rule, a weakness that supposedly goes back for centuries, deep into the old folklore of Europe. We've seen it in, countless books and movies. It's basically a fact at this point. Except that's not true. Not at all. The whole silver bullet thing, it has pretty much zero basis in actual historical folklore. So where on earth did it come from? Well, the answer is a lot closer to home, and it's the key to unlocking one of the biggest and, frankly, most successful folklore hoaxes in modern history. It turns out, the so-called ancient rules for our most famous monsters, they weren't passed down through generations. Nope. They were written by screenwriters on a studio lot, specifically to sell movie tickets. So back in the golden age of Hollywood, Universal Pictures basically owned the horror genre. And while they were creating their legendary Universal classic monsters, their writers and artists weren't just adapting old stories. They were standardizing them, creating a rule book for how monsters should look and act that we still, to this day, follow. Okay, let's start with the big one, Dracula. In Bram Stoker's original novel from 1897, Dracula can totally walk around in the daytime. Yeah, he's a little weaker, but that's it. But, that's not very dramatic for a movie ending, is it? So when the silent film Nosferatu came out in 1922, the filmmakers just invented a new rule for a better climax. Sunlight now kills him. Universal Pictures saw that, loved it, and boom, now it's the number one rule for every vampire out there. A purely cinematic invention. And then you have Frankenstein's monster, which is such a great example of a technical problem creating an icon. In Mary Shelley's book, the creature is brilliant, he's well-spoken, and he has yellowish skin. The monster we all picture, the grunting green guy with the bolts in his neck, that is 100% Hollywood. And the green skin? That wasn't some deep artistic choice, it was practical. The specific shade of green makeup they used just happened to look more ghoulish and pop better on the black and white film they were using in the 30s. Now, Dracula and Frankenstein, they at least had famous novels to start from. But the Wolfman? He's the ultimate example of Hollywood just making it all up. He is, by far, the most synthetic monster in the entire group. A total fabrication. This chart right here just lays out all the evidence. But let's really focus on that Wolfman row. In actual European folklore, werewolves were all over the place. Sometimes the change was voluntary, sometimes not. And there was certainly no universal weakness to silver. But for the 1941 movie The Wolfman, the screenwriter, a guy named Kurt Siodomak, he just invented almost everything we think of as werewolf lore. The full moon making the change involuntary, the weakness to silver bullets, even that famous poem about wolfsbane, all of it was created for the movie, just to make the character more tragic. So how is this even possible, right? How can something a screenwriter made up suddenly become ancient fact? Well, it's because of the very nature of how we tell stories. Stories are not static things. They're meant to be retold and reshaped over time. One of the oldest tricks in the book is something called a frame narrative. This is basically when you have an outer story that sets the stage for an inner one. Anytime a character says, "Gather round and let me tell you a story," that's a frame. It gives you the context and gives the storyteller permission to start weaving a tale. And you can take this even further with what are called nested stories. This is the idea of a story inside another story inside another story. It's just like those Russian Matryoshka nesting dolls. Each layer you peel back can give you a new point of view or add this incredible depth to the whole thing. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a masterclass in this. Seriously, let's trace the layers. Step 1, it starts with a sea captain, Robert Walton, writing letters about his journey. Step 2, within those letters, he starts writing down this incredible story that Victor Frankenstein is telling him. Step 3, inside Victor's story, he starts recounting the tale his own creature told him. And then finally, step 4, at the very center of it all, the creature tells the story of this family he secretly observed. It's 4 layers deep. It shows you exactly how stories get passed along and filtered through each new telling. And this constant retelling, this constant reframing, is a form of revisionism.
And that's not a bad thing. It's really just how culture works. We retell old myths to make them relevant for us right now, to explore new ideas, or maybe even to push back against messages in the original that we don't agree with anymore. It's literally how stories stay alive. But all of that just explains the how. It doesn't explain why. Why are our brains so ready to accept these new versions as the truth? Well, the answer to that is buried deep in our evolutionary psychology.
Think about our ancient ancestors out on the savannah. They hear a rustle in the grass. Now, it could be a tiger, or it could just be the wind. They have two choices. They can ignore it, a miss, and risk being lunch, or they can run, a false alarm, and maybe they just waste a little energy. The cost of a miss, death, is infinitely higher than the cost of a false alarm. So evolution built us a brain that's designed to see patterns and assume the worst, even when it isn't there.
And this quote just sums it up perfectly. Our brains are not built for accuracy. They are built for survival. We are hardwired to find connections, to see faces in the clouds, and to accept a really compelling story, like, say, a werewolf being weak to silver, because a simple, memorable rule is way easier for our survival brain to handle than a messy, complicated reality. So when you combine Hollywood's powerful storytelling machine, the natural flexibility of stories themselves, and our own pattern-seeking brains, you get the perfect recipe for creating brand new myths. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a giant, culture-wide game of telephone. You know the one. An original story gets told, then retold, then it gets adapted into a movie, then repeated in another movie. And with every single retelling, details get changed or exaggerated or just flat out invented until the new version completely replaces the original in our mind. Here's a tiny, perfect little example of how this whole thing works. It's a simple little joke you might have heard as a kid. Pete and Repeat sat on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? The answer, of course, is Repeat. And the punchline isn't just the answer, it's the whole mechanism. It is through repetition that these new monster rules from Universal, the silver bullets, the deadly sunlight, got so embedded in our culture. They were repeated in sequels, then in other movies by other studios, then in TV shows and comic books, until they just stopped feeling like a Hollywood invention and started feeling like ancient folklore. The repeat became more real than the original. And that leaves us with one last, kind of provocative thought. This process never stopped. The game of telephone is always, always being played. So what widely accepted facts or cultural truths that we believe today are actually just Hollywood's latest inventions? What are the modern myths that future generations are going to mistake for ancient history? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.